I used to be the assistant manager of a Walmart store. The actual manager who I worked for was a really lazy and entitled guy, and he would always do whatever he could to have me do as much of his work as possible. He would just sit in his office pretending to do important stuff, while I actually ran the store. That's why I was always in charge of hiring new employees. Walmart has pretty high employee turnover, so keeping the store staffed was a big part of my job. It seemed like every week or two, we had a new cohort of cashiers and sales associates coming in. This story is about one young man who I hired. Looking back, I know that was a big mistake. Liam was 20 years old, but he looked much older. He had several tattoos on his arms and one on his face. He was extremely thin, but still he looked like the kind of guy you wouldn't want to mess with. However, like I said, turnover is high at Walmart, and we needed people. Also, Liam did have his high school diploma, so I figured that he must not be a total mess. After his first week, I was surprised by how well he was doing. He was at least 10 minutes early for every shift, and he was doing a great job. He wasn't the most friendly guy I'd ever met. He was really quiet, and he kept his head down and got his work done. I shouldn't have been so quick to judge, I thought. This went on for another week or so, without any incident. One day, Liam was stocking the shelves in the sporting goods section when I looked over at him. He was surrounded by 3 guys who looked like trouble. At first glance, I thought they were just customers and they were asking him for help. But after a closer look, I could tell by their body language that the conversation was far from friendly. These guys were up to no good. I could tell that Liam was trying to de-escalate the situation, but the guys wouldn't leave him alone. At one point, one of the guys shoved Liam, knocking him into a bin of basketballs. I had seen enough, and I called security. We had 2 security guards on duty at the time. They approached the group, and as soon as they did, the 3 guys took off running. While they were on their way out, one of them shouted back to Liam and said something like, "You're dead," or "We'll get you next time." I may have cleaned up the language on that a little bit, but I can assure you that it was something threatening. The security guards decided to call the police and file a report. When they arrived, they decided to bring Liam into the station to do a full interview. They seemed to believe that there was cause to be concerned for his life. Judging by what happened, I think they made the right decision. That was the last time I ever saw Liam. He didn't officially quit, but he never showed up for work again, and I never saw him around town either. I never found out exactly what happened that day, but if I had to guess, Liam had a dark past. Maybe it was drugs, or some kind of gambling debt. These guys must have had some kind of unfinished business with him. It's a shame because it seemed that Liam was trying to turn his life around and hold down a job. I believe in second chances, so it's sad to see something like this. Whatever happened to him, I wish the best for Liam, and hope he was able to get a new start. I worked at a Walmart supercenter during my last year of high school. I usually stocked shelves in the soft drink and chip section. It was a pretty repetitive job. You just go back and forth making sure those shelves are always full. Anyone who has worked at a grocery store will know that this aisle is one that gets emptied the quickest, so there's usually someone assigned to check it regularly. This was a relatively quiet evening though, so I didn't need to spend my entire time working on that. My store manager would say that there's always work to be done, and if I was ever caught standing around doing nothing, then I would get in trouble. Sometimes I would just work really slow so that I wouldn't run out of things to do. This time, however, I did that and there was still not much to do. Because of that, I decided to do some things that were not normally part of my job, just to keep busy. I swept the floors in the back room first, but that only took an hour or so. After that, I decided to check the customer washrooms to see if they needed toilet paper or paper towels. Then maybe I'd empty the garbage cans. When I first walked in, everything looked fine. I stood there for a minute pretending to look around in order to waste as much time as possible. The paper towel dispenser was full, and all the stalls had plenty of toilet paper. I was about to turn around and leave when I decided to check the garbage can. It was almost full, so I decided to take it out. I pulled the large black bag out of the can and placed it on the ground, tying it up at the top. Then I put a new bag in its place. After that, I grabbed the full bag and threw it over my shoulder, then started walking to the back room where there was a large garbage dumpster that we would use. While I was walking, I realized that the bag was just a little too heavy, considering that it should just be used for paper towels. It was quite full, but the weight was definitely off. I thought about it while I walked, and by the time I reached the dumpster, I was too curious not to check. Instead of just throwing it in, I emptied the bag slowly into the dumpster. At least a few hundred paper towels poured out of the large bag, but eventually, I found something else. Something that didn't belong. Another black garbage bag toppled out, this one much smaller. It was partially filled and tied with a large knot. When I picked it up, it was obvious that this was the source of the weight that I was feeling. It was like the bag was full of rocks. It was that heavy. I placed the bag on the ground and stood over it, trying to decide what to do. It wasn't long before I decided to open it, so I tore the thin plastic and dumped its contents onto the concrete floor. A loud thud echoed through the room when something struck the floor. I almost lost my lunch when I realized what it was. There was a handgun lying on the floor in front of me. In addition, there were a few pairs of surgical gloves in the bag as well. This seemed like bad news. I called my boss over the PA system, and as soon as I calmed down enough to do so, the police were called soon after. It turned out that the gun had been used in a robbery on the other side of town, where a shot was actually fired. Luckily, nobody was hurt, but the gun was used to track down the guy who shot it. It was actually registered to him, not the smartest move. I guess he was hoping to throw it out at Walmart and then nobody would ever find it again. Unfortunately for him, that didn't happen. He hasn't been sentenced yet, but he's looking at least a few years in prison, from what I've read online. I was working the evening shift at Walmart. I was a cashier, but the cart guy had called in sick, so I was filling in for him partially. I would go out now and then when there weren't any customers at my till. It wasn't a busy night, so it was no real problem for me. Besides, I actually enjoyed the fresh summer air for the 5 or 10 minutes that I was out there. On one of my trips out to the parking lot, I noticed an old camper van in the far corner of the lot. It was directly under one of the lamp posts, so it was easy to see. My guess is that it was from the mid-90s, and it looked well worn, with several patches of rust throughout the body. I passed it on my way to one of the cart corrals, and when I did, I noticed a man looking at me through one of the back windows. He was an older man with a gray beard and bushy hair escaping out the sides of his baseball hat. That startled me, but I wasn't overly concerned. Walmart allows people to camp in the parking lots, so for someone to park a van there for a few days was not that unusual. I would see it from time to time. I didn't acknowledge the guy, just looked ahead and kept working. My shift ended at 11 p.m., and by then, I had all but forgotten about the guy. When I was walking through the dark parking lot to my car, I was surprised to see that the van was gone. I figured that the guy had been camping out in the parking lot, so why would he take off at this hour? It didn't make any sense. If he was going to move on, then why not wait until the morning? Strange as it seemed, I kept walking to my car, and when I made it there, I unlocked the door and got in. I started my engine and took one final look around the empty parking lot, then started driving. When I was about halfway home, I noticed a pair of headlights in my rearview mirror. It was too dark to tell what kind of car it was, because I was on an unlit road at the time. The headlights followed me for several minutes, until I made it to a more residential area where there were some streetlights. That was when I realized that the headlights belonged to that old camper van from the parking lot. That guy had followed me. My heart started beating faster when I saw him looking at me through the rearview mirror. I had no idea what he could possibly want with me, or what I had done to deserve this. All I could think to do was to keep driving. I decided not to drive home, because the last thing I wanted was for this guy to know where I live. The guy was taking every turn that I took, and he was very close behind me. I was trying to think of a plan, and eventually realized something. I had filled up my car that morning, and I had almost a full tank before leaving work. There was no way that that big old camper van could stay on the road for as long as my car. All I had to do was wait him out. Relieved to have an actual plan, I simply kept driving, and the guy kept following me for about another half hour. Eventually, he disappeared into the night, and I never saw him again. Although I made it through this incident, I'm still very confused about what happened. There's no clear reason that this guy would want to follow me. I tried to remember if I had some kind of interaction with him in the store that might have given him a reason to want to harm me, but I really can't remember anything. It still scares me to think of what would have happened if I had driven home with him on my tail. There's no telling what he would have done, but that didn't happen, and I've lived to tell about it. I used to live right down the road from a Walmart store. It was pretty convenient because Walmart has everything that I need. I would go shopping there at least a few times a week, sometimes every day. Therefore, I got to know pretty much everyone who worked there. If not by name, then I would at least recognize almost everyone. One day, I walked in through the large sliding doors and headed for the grocery section. That's when I saw an employee who I didn't recognize. I didn't think much of it because he must just be new. Walmart is always bringing in new workers. This guy was older than most, probably mid-50s with dark hair and eyes. He had really bad posture, like he was hunched over. His head shot straight out from his shoulders. As I walked past him, his eyes followed me and gave me chills. I can't quite explain why I was so put off by him. He didn't seem mean or angry, so it wasn't that. It just set off an alarm in my head. I continued shopping, and I was alone in one of the aisles. I turned around and was startled to see the guy standing there, just looking at me. I have no idea how long he was there, or how he managed to sneak up on me like that. I jumped back in shock, then the man leaned forward and said, "I was just wondering if I can help you find anything." I told him that I was fine, and that I didn't need any help. Normally I would introduce myself to a new employee, but I was quite shaken up, and I probably wasn't as friendly as I could have been. He just stood there awkwardly, and I turned around and walked away. There were still a few things I needed in that aisle, but I just wanted to get away from that guy, so I decided to come back for them later. I continued shopping for another 10 to 15 minutes. I was still on edge from the incident earlier, so I was constantly looking over my shoulder to see if that guy was around. It seemed that every time I looked around, I saw the guy, and it always appeared that he was looking at me. I started walking faster, trying to get away from him, but every time I looked back, I saw that guy. Eventually, I ran into one of the store security guards and told him what was happening. I described the guy, but the security guard told me that nobody was working who matched that description. I did a quick scan of the store, and of course, he was nowhere to be seen. This had me confused. Was that just some random guy walking around Walmart dressed like an employee? If he didn't really work there, then who was he? And what could he possibly want with me? Whatever the case may be, I was terrified, and I no longer cared about my shopping, and I just wanted to go home. I asked the security guard to walk me to my car, and he agreed. When we were exiting the store, I looked left, and what I saw still gives me nightmares. I saw that creepy guy peeking at us from around the corner of the store. He wasn't even wearing a uniform anymore. I quickly pointed and shouted to the security guard that it was him, but I was too late. The guy had taken off already. I eventually made it to my car and drove home. It's been a few weeks now, and I haven't been back to the store since. I'm terrified that if I go back, then that creepy guy's going to be waiting for me. I still can't explain what he was doing, but I hope I never see him again.